Hey guys and girls, this is Alish from gainmedialab.com. Welcome to my exciting world of live audio mixing. In today's video, we get to mix some drums. But before we get into all that, make sure that you have subscribed to this channel and turned on the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the audio deliciousness coming your way every Monday. With all that said and done, let's just start mixing. A few weeks ago, I posted a video about using parallel compression on your drum mixes creatively, and I got a few messages from people asking me if I could show how I mixed the drums on this particular console. So in the videos to follow, I will do just that. Because I think this is going to be a longer process, I will sort of divide the process for specific tracks into separate videos, and I will post them each Monday until we get to some sort of a finished product with this mix. We will start today with the overheads, and I will explain my workflow and my techniques and approaches to mixing drums. I will be using the same recordings that we have used before, recorded by Guerrilla, a good friend of mine who is also a great drummer, a studio artist, and a drummer for a band called San Diego. You should check them out. I will post the link to their website in the video description down below. With all that said and done, let's just jump into the mix. Let's talk about the setup for a second. I have 10 channels of drums, kick in, kick out, 2 snares, the top and the bottom, hi-hat, 3 toms, one of them is a floor tom, and 2 overheads. And I am routing that to my drum bus, which is my normal drum bus. And I have already set up another drum bus, which is going to be my parallel compression. And we will see whether or not we get to use it, what types of sounds we get if we apply that for this particular mix. I also have one effects channel set up, or auxiliary send set up for effects, because I want to show how you can shape the sound using just one effect for the entire drum kit. And these are the tracks that I've been using before, like I said, recorded by a good friend of mine, Guerrilla, a great drummer, drummer for a band called San Diego, but he's also been a recording artist for a while. We've recorded this with the same console, the Behringer X32, at his house a couple of months ago for a lockdown project that he was doing. So nothing fancy, no fancy microphones, no fancy studio environments, just a guy with his great tuned drum, a great drummer, a few microphones into this console, and this is the result that we got. And the mix is going to be set up from this particular starting point. Let's just dive right in. All right. I start with the overheads, and the reason why I start with the overheads is I want to basically get the sound of the drum through my overheads. Now, there are a few different approaches on whether or not you should do that or how to do that, but I like to get the fullness of the snare. I like to get the body of the toms through the overheads, and I like to start with the overheads because if I shape the sound of the overheads first, then I don't have to go back to sort of tweak the sound of the snare, tweak the EQs of the toms once I add overheads into the mix. I already have them set up. Plus, I compare all of the polarity switches for all the channels through the overheads so that I don't mess something up phase-wise. So I start with the overheads and just listen to any anomalies, shape them the way I want them, compress them slightly so that the snare heads, which will usually be the loudest sound source in the overheads, are tamed. And then I sort of start adding other elements of the drum kit into the mix, right? So let's just start with setting the gains. Overhead left. If you hear the sound jumping into mono, it's because we are listening to the monitor cue, and when I solo a channel, everything sort of gets compressed to mono, but they are sort of turned hard left and right in the pan settings or the pan width, right? Gain wise, I'm shooting for, let's say, minus 15 dB on the dBFS scale with the largest hits, so that I have enough input gain RMS wise. Okay. These channels are now set with, let's say, the same input level. Let's just hear how they sound in terms of the pan section, right? Whether or not, let's say, the snare is in the center, the kick is in the center, so that, you know, something is not way off. And I'm just listening to the left and right, seeing if something is overbearing within these two channels. Yeah, sounds okay. Now let's check for polarity. Remember when I said that if I turn on the solo, the monitor cue, it will sort of compress everything or sort of turn everything mono. This is great for checking for polarity issues. So I will turn on and off the polarity switch on the overhead right and listen to the low end or the low mid of the snare and the kick and see whether or not that is retained or whether or not that disappears or gets added once I flip the polarity switch, and see which sounds better. Okay, so engaged. And you can immediately hear how much thinner the snare gets and how much of the low end of the kick we lose when that polarity switch is flipped. Off. On. Off. We'll leave it at off because I want to retain the fullness of the snare. Now, if you do this in completely in stereo width, you can still hear it, but it is much less obvious. Let's listen to it. Off. Right, compare this to a really obvious sort of cancellation in the low end if we have it in mono. So if you want, especially when we're listening to this on headphones, it's more obvious. If you're listening to this from a PA system where you will have more mono summation, that difference will not be as strict or as obvious as it is when using headphones. Okay. So right now we have set the trims, we have set the polarity. Let's go and start shaping the EQ. I want to retain, like I said, the low end of the snare, so I won't go crazy with the low cut setting or the high pass filter. Let me just loop this. All right. Let's EQ. And I'll mute one channel so that you hear what I'm going for. I can bring this up to the center. Okay, I'm listening to the snare and trying to figure out what is the low end of the snare that I want to keep. See right there, I've started losing the low end of the snare, so I'm going to go back a bit, 140, and I'll repeat the same one on both channels. Nothing major, just cleaning up a bit. Now let's listen to the information I'm getting frequency-wise from these drums, from these overheads. There's a bit of boxiness around 400 Hertz. So let's see if I can show you what I mean. Yeah. This. That sound is really what it's sort of bothering me. So this gets cut. 500. Okay. We'll bring this back into full stereo width. All right, anything else that bothers me? I would prefer a bit more sparkle in the high end. So there are a couple of ways I can go about this. I can sort of boost the highs a bit. Or I can cut some of the sort of upper mids, and that will leave the sparkle on. It doesn't really matter which approach you go for. I tend to go for cutting on the EQ rather than boosting. But I'm not doing, you know, anything crazy in terms of EQ. So even if I would add both filters to get that sort of sweetness, and I'm just boosting over 10K, that just adds a bit of that sizzle on top. And I've just added like a couple of dB on both channels, like 2 dB, just to get sort of all of that sparkle of the high end of the cymbals, which I really like. But that's probably the only high end that I will boost of the lot. So let's just compare, you know, the channels with the EQ and without. So out. With. They sound a bit more controlled. They sound a bit thinner. And we will figure out if we need a bit more umphiness and low end snare body by adding some frequencies around 200, maybe 250. But for now, I like sort of this clean, transparent, slightly brilliant or sparkling sound of the overheads, which is a good place to start adding other elements of the drum. So we've done the EQ part of the overheads. Let's now talk about compression. And the basic function of this compression is going to be to tame the snare sound, which is going to probably be the loudest signal in the overheads, and sort of bring it closer together to the level of the cymbals so that it's not jumping out, it's not affecting the dynamics of the entire kit. Plus, if we compress a bit, then we get sort of the tail of the cymbals sort of more natural and more smooth in the mix. and we can sort of tweak the transients versus the rest of the signal if we compress correctly and, you know, to taste according to whatever it is that we are trying to achieve. So let's just listen to the overheads again. So you can hear basically how the snare is overbearing in the mix. Waiting for some cymbals to drop in. Okay. So let's just see if we can sort of get this snare under control. Yep. I'll just be working with one channel. I'll bring it to mono so you can hear what I'm doing. And a great way to do that, to translate what the compressor is doing, is to set the threshold really low, set the ratio really high, so you can actually hear what the settings of the attack and release are doing. So I'll show you how that sounds like and what I'm going for, right? So first the attack. Since I want to tame the transient of the snare, but still sort of keep it a bit more natural, I'm going with a slightly slower attack at about 20 milliseconds. This sort of I'm just listening to the cymbals to hear how that affects the initial hit of the cymbals, which should sort of leave all of the transients of the cymbal coming through, and then we'll play with the release time. This would be really aggressive with the release time lowered to, let's say, 5 milliseconds, but I want a bit longer than that because I don't want to have the effect of pumping when the compressor hits the overheads. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I'll drop the ratio. Raise the threshold. So I'm getting about 4 to 5 dB of gain reduction. Here's another trick I use. I use a very soft knee on this compression, so that it doesn't really work hard. It has sort of a smoother transition between compressed and uncompressed, and that helps you sort of tame the snare, but still keep the overheads sounding really natural. Plus, you can set the compression a bit higher, and it will still sort of sound natural. So that's what I'm going for. So what I'll do now is turn it back to the left side, and you can hear the difference between the compressed and the uncompressed. This is compressed, uncompressed. I'll copy the compression settings to the right channel, unmute all, and then we can take a listen to the compressed versus uncompressed. This is compressed. Uncompressed. You can hear that we sort of lost the entire room when I sort of removed compression. So the snare is now tucked underneath the cymbals, which is what we wanted to get. Okay, I'm happy with that. And this is going to be the end of video number 1. I will be adding other elements of the drum kit into this mix in the following videos, just to keep it, in manageable time chunks. We will be adding kicks the next time around. Hope you tune in. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that you would do differently, if there's something that you have heard me do that you don't agree or agree with. I'm always open for suggestions and learning new things. While you're doing that, make sure that you have subscribed, liked, and shared this video, and make sure that you also check out gainmedialab.com for more audio deliciousness. Until next time, take care, mix great shows. Bye.